So I looked this up this morning. Matthew Quick first appeared at an event for the Princeton Public Library on the evening of November 15th, 2013, as a part of Princeton Reads, which was a town-wide reading event that we did back in the day. And it included discussion groups, film screenings, and other activities. And this time it was all based on his novel, The Silver Linings Playbook. I actually looked it up. We still had this in our archives. I printed out a copy. And there it is. That was the Silver Lining Playbook guide. And we had a whole bunch of fun events, including, my personal favorite was we did a pep rally out on the plaza that was followed by a screening of the Eagles game to tie into it. And we also, and we actually preceded it with a short family fun run from the high school to the plaza, and we wore garbage bags while we did it.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I'll send you a picture of that. That was a fun one. So that was a really big deal, and we had a nice crowd come out for that event. And Matthew was also talking about Leonard Peacock at that event. That had just come out. So we are thrilled to be welcoming Matthew back to the library, almost 9 years to the date, because it's plus 5 days. November, yeah. And this time is for the release of We Are the Light, his new novel that explores both grief as well as the daily miracle of love. In addition to being the New York Times bestselling author of the Silver Linings Playbook, which was made into an Oscar-winning film, he is also the author of The Good Luck of Right Now, Love May Fail, The Reason You're Alive, and 4 young adult novels. His work has been translated into more than 30 languages, and The Hollywood Reporter has named him one of Hollywood's 25 most powerful authors. He is a native of New Jersey, from Collingswood?
Oakland, but I went to Collingswood.
Okay. And he currently lives in the North Carolina's Outer Banks with his wife, the novelist Alicia Bessette. And we're going to get Alicia here sometime. Maybe we'll have you guys in conversation.
That would be great.
Yeah, we'll do that someday when you're swinging through.
She's probably watching at home right now. So.
If we get,
She will be.
She would be, yeah. He is joined today in conversation with our moderator, Amy Jo Burns. Amy Jo is the author of the memoir Cinderland and the novel Shiner. Her writing has appeared in the Paris Review Daily, Tin House, Plowshares, Electric Literature, and among many other places. She is currently at work on her next novel, which was to be titled And Sons, but she's just told me she's needing to change the name. It's still a work in progress.
If you have any suggestions, I'll take them.
So it's going to be published by Celadon Books at some point in 2024, and I already called first dibs on having her come for that book release because she was here for Shiner, and so we're going to have her back. So you can find her on Twitter at Amy Jo Burns. I know, Matthew, you don't do Twitter, so.
No, I just do my monthly personal letter.
Yes, he does have, by the way, you should go to his website, matthewquick.com, and sign up for his monthly personal letter. I look forward to getting it every month. It comes into your email, and it's just such a delight to read. And
Thank you. It's MatthewQuickWriter.com.
oh, Matthew Quick
Because
Writer.
MatthewQuick.com is a painter in Australia. He's a wonderful painter, and I've gotten to know him online. It's not me. I'm not the painter, so.
Okay, so that's the introductions, and we're going to let Amy Jo, our moderator, take it away.
Great. Can everyone hear me okay? I've got this on. I just want to check. Is everybody good? Okay. Well, welcome. We're good? Yeah?
We're good.
Yeah. Welcome, Matthew. We are so excited to have you. I was just saying with one of your fellow fans up here before we started that this is a kind of book I just feel so excited that I get to talk to you about it, because my favorite kind of reading experience is when you finish the book and then you feel more alive than you felt at the beginning when you started the book.
Thank you for that.
And it was one of those books when I closed it, I just thought, who can I tell about this book? So I'm grateful that I get to be here with you and with all of you. For some of you who have read it, maybe some of you haven't read it. Either way, you're in for a total treat. Janie mentioned this a little bit, but you do have some roots in this area. Just as a way to sort of start us off, can you tell us a little bit about, what your history is? You set some books in South Jersey, in Philadelphia. Can you just tell us a little bit about, your bio as it relates?
Yeah, sure. So I was born right outside of North Philadelphia. In the first couple of years of my life, I lived in North Philly. And then my parents moved over the bridge, and I grew up in Oakland, New Jersey. And Oakland is kind of a salt-of-the-earth town. It was blue collar, and most of my friends, their parents were plumbers and bookies and things of this nature. And I loved it. It was a great childhood. I love Oakland. It's a wonderful, wonderful place. And I went to Collingswood High School, where my father went, and my grandparents lived in Collingswood. And then I went to LaSalle University in North Philly, where I studied under Justin Cronin, who was my creative writing teacher. I actually just did an event with him in Denver, and we were joking about how in 1997 it would have been so weird if we just shook hands and said, "See you in 30 years in Denver." You know, it was very, very, very odd. But it was one of these full circle moments where I actually spoke after Justin. Like, he spoke first, and then I spoke, and it was really a deep honor for me. And I'm halfway through his new novel, The Passenger. It's really good. It comes out later next year. So I have Philly roots, and I can't stop writing about that area. I tried to write about other places, and I can't. I just think that's where my psyche lives. It's where I dream. If I dream, I'm always in Philly, and it's kind of where my heart is, even though I'm in Outer Banks. And I think sometimes you have to move away from the place to kind of look at it from the outside. And I wrote Silver Linings Playbook when I was living in Massachusetts and very much missing Philadelphia. But I think that perspective of being outside of the area and looking back in really gave me the breathing space to write about that place. And I think now on OBX, it's the same thing. You know, I can kind of find that objectivity by being so far away from that place that I love, and it's complicated. You know, things about that area that haunt me. You know, there are unresolved issues that live in that area, and I think that's why I keep going back to the page over and over again.
There's something about missing a place that is very creatively fertile, I think. I feel that too.
Yeah, and also just trying to figure a place out.
Yeah.
You know, almost psychoanalyzing a place.
Yeah.
And I think that each time I go back to that area, I'm trying to do that. I'm trying to psychoanalyze the area, the people, but also psychoanalyze not just me, but the history of me, my parents, my grandparents, and so forth. So it's important.
Great. And you know, speaking of Pennsylvania, his latest novel is set in Pennsylvania, and you know, you'll see on the cover here, there's a movie theater, and that's an actual place, based on an actual place. But the town that he names it in the novel is called Majestic. It's a really unforgettable place. And I'm wondering, you know, just for anybody who might be coming in who hasn't heard that much about the book, what can you tell us about the novel as a way to start us off?
Okay, yeah, I can tell you kind of the general plot of the novel, and then also the origin story, which is a little bit more complicated.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the book is about a man named Lucas Goodgame, and at the start of the novel, he has this experience. He's lived through this horrific tragedy that happens in a historic movie house. And on page 1, at the lowest point in his life, after he has experienced unthinkable horror, his Jungian analyst abandons him. He reaches out to his Jungian analyst, who he's been in analysis with, and the analyst says, "I can no longer treat you." He's been also affected by the tragedy. And so Lucas very heroically decides that he's going to woo his analyst back by writing him letters. So the book takes place as a series of letters to his analyst that go unanswered. And so as we're reading these letters, we really get to see Lucas's psyche coping with the tragedy. And there's a lot of dramatic irony because he is in crisis. We as the audience see a lot more than he sees. He copes with the tragedy in 2 ways. The first way is that he creates this very rich fantasy life that creates almost like this womb for him, you know, so that he can go back in and heal. And the other way he copes is through community. And Lucas, at the beginning of the novel, before the tragedy, was a high school counselor, and he had been counseling a lot of students. And so his analyst abandons him, but the thing that he realizes very quickly is that he can't go back into the high school, so he's abandoning all of his people as well, all of the students that he was working with. One of those students shows up in his backyard and puts up a tent and won't leave. It kind of forces this relationship with Lucas, and this boy is named Eli. He's an 18-year-old young man, and his brother is the shooter in the tragedy, and the whole town is ostracized Eli, even though he had nothing to do with it, and they projected all their shame and hate onto him, and you can imagine what that would do to an 18-year-old young man. And so Eli is just desperate. He just needs someone to help him. And so Lucas very heroically decides that he's going to take this boy on and try to save him. And they come up with this plan to create this art project that's going to be Eli's senior project so he can graduate high school. And they imagine that it will not only save the two of them, but the entire community. They're going to try to save the entire community through art. I like to say that this book is about radical love. And I think even people who love the book, you know, they get really excited and I just read this book, what's it about? And they say, oh, it's about a shooting in a movie house. No, that's not what the book is about. In fact, that doesn't even happen the book starts after that. The book is a radical response to evil, and that radical response is love. That's really what the book is about. And so do you want me to tell the origin story too?
Yes, I'd love to.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's a two-prong origin story for this. It's a little bit long, but it's a pretty good story, so I'll tell it to you. The first was that I was asked to do a one-book, one-town event in 2014 in Ambler, PA. I'd never been there before, and it's a great honor, just like when it happened in Princeton. You go, and it's really exciting, and everyone's read your book, and there's a lot of people there. 2 years before that, I think it was 2012, was the shooting in Aurora, Colorado. My wife and I are big moviegoers, and we've always loved the cinema. And our first date, when she was 17, I was 19, we went to the art house in Philly, the Ritz, and we saw this movie, The Three Musketeers. It was a really bad adaptation, it was a bad movie, but the date was very nice, and I remember holding hands in the movie theater and feeling as though it was the beginning of something pretty magical. And I remember kissing on the corner outside the movie theater, that was pretty nice too. And that started this great love affair with movies, where we saw a lot of better movies over the years, but Alicia and I had always gone to the movie theater religiously. And I mean that in that we went regularly, but also it was kind of our church as storytellers, like a church of story. And you would go into, I think a lot of us think we just go into the movie theater, we consume our popcorn and soda, we stare kind of mindlessly at the screen. And there's some of that. That's fun to kind of turn your brain off and go to the movies. But as storytellers, you know, we would go to the movies to study the craft of story. And we would go into a dark room and we would gaze up at these godlike, larger-than-life images on the screen, and we would study the human condition. You know, we'd study what makes people tick, and we would go to the church of story over and over. It's a sacred thing for us. And so when the shooting in Aurora, Colorado happened, you know, any shooting that happens anywhere is horrific and affects me. But I was a teacher, and after Columbine, I never once thought, oh, I can't go into a school again. I just kept going into the schools. I mean, it was horrific and affected me, but I didn't lose the ability to walk into a school. After the shooting in Aurora, Colorado, I started to go to the movies and look over my shoulder a lot. I was like, who is sitting behind me in this dark room, and where are the exits? And when we moved to OBX, we went to go see American Sniper, which is a pretty loaded movie, just going in. But it was a packed house, and there were these 20-something men, and they were drunk, and they're acting very inappropriately. And other men got very offended. I think they were veterans, and there was almost this big brawl in the movie theater. They were right behind me, and it was very frightening and very disconcerting. And so I started to really kind of have this fear about going to the movies, like this paranoia. So when I was asked to do the event in Ambler, I show up and it's in this historic movie house. And it's the house actually on the cover of We Are the Light. It's the Ambler Theater. And I was enchanted by this movie theater. As soon as I walked up, the marquee's beautiful. It looks like a cathedral. I think it was built in the 30s. It's this gorgeous historic building. And they gave me a tour, and I'm looking all over. It's just wonderful. I'm just enchanted by this place. And then I get up in front of a couple hundred people and start speaking. And there's a part of my brain that's like, this is amazing. And I'm connecting with all these people. They love my book. It's wonderful. And then there's this other dark voice in my head that's saying, are you safe up here? How do you know you can trust other people in the audience? How was the movie today? Like, how do you know? And it was like this dark voice. And so after the event, I went across the street with the librarians and we had drinks. And we had a couple drinks and I came out and I was waiting for my car and I'm looking at this gorgeous lit up theater. And there's this other voice in my head that says, you have to write about this. You have to write about a movie house. A movie house that's been sullied, and your characters have to redeem this house. They have to sanctify it or re-sanctify it. And so I went home and I tried to write my movie house novel for 7 years, and I just kept failing and failing, false start. I just could not write this novel. And then in 2018, I got 100% sober. And I had been flirting with sobriety for a long time, but I finally went all the way. And my big reward for getting sober was crippling writer's block. I had always treated my anxiety and depression 2 ways, through writing and drinking. So I took drinking off the board, and immediately my other escape route vanished. And it was tough. And when I say writer's block, I mean I would go into a room every single day for 8 hours, no matter what, and I would try to write, and I couldn't write a sentence. You know, I'd get to the end of the year and I might have 10 pages, and I used to be able to write 10 pages in a couple hours. I mean, now I can write 10 pages again in a couple hours, but a whole year to write 10 pages, and I would show them to my wife, who's also a writer, and she would cry because they were so bad. She didn't know what to do, and she was scared. So that's the type of writing, that lasted for years. It was emasculating, it shattered my ego, and it took me to this really low, dark place. And I had this secret that, since 2008, I had this dirty little secret. You know, I published Silver Linings, and I was literally going around the world telling people, and especially men, if you have mental health issues, reach out and get help. Like, there's no shame in getting help. Well, guess who wasn't getting help? This guy. You know, I was not getting the help that I needed. I was drinking privately. And so after, you know, a few years of miserable writer's block where I couldn't produce anything, I finally was so humbled that I entered into Jungian analysis. And consciously I said, I'll just do this for a couple months, and then I'll be writing again, and that'll be over. And I didn't expect to bond with my analyst in this like very profound way, where he started changing my life in this radical way and showing up for me a couple times a week and being my advocate and battling for me very paternally, you know, and I talk about father hunger in the book. And it was so wonderful that I thought to myself, this can't possibly be true. Like, it can't possibly last. And I started having these paranoid thoughts about what happens if I say the wrong thing in analysis and my analyst doesn't want to work with me anymore, if I offend him. Or I started thinking, what happens if he dies? What happens if he gets hit by a car? What happens if he has a heart attack? And I started to get really paranoid about that. And like I always do with my mental health problems, I drug it into the creative writing wrestling ring and tried to wrestle it down on the page. And then I thought, oh, what if I have a character who's abandoned by his analyst? And I thought, oh, wait a minute, remember that idea I had about the movie house? What if I had a character who experiences a tragedy in a movie house, and then on page 1, he's abandoned by his analyst? And then my wife had been trying to get me to write another epistolary novel in letters, because even through my writer's block, I could write letters to people. So a few people had suggested, why don't you try writing a book in letters? Ego did not want to do that. Like, I did not want to do it. But as soon as I had those 2 ideas and I went upstairs and I typed in the words, Dear Karl, comma, it was like, writer's block over. And it was just, I could not stop writing. It was days and days, 10, 12 hours, just writing and writing. I was writing 10, 15 pages a day. I was just go, go, go. I could not stop. It was like someone flipped a switch inside of me, and I was just going. And I like to say that I didn't choose the format and the topic of this book. It chose me. And like, once I submitted to it, that's when it was able to come through me. The writer's block was really me trying to do things that my psyche or my soul didn't want to do. I was trying to write the wrong book for the wrong reasons. And it wasn't until I was humbled enough and I got through the ego problem enough to submit to what I was supposed to write all along.
Wow. Oh,
Yeah.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. I think, yeah.
Oh, wow, round of applause. Thank you.
You know, when you
I like this crowd.
When you hold a finished book in your hand, you have no way of knowing everything that went into it, all the false starts, all the things that you think, oh, this is failure, or oh, you know, I've hit my peak. And I think, for me as a writer, but also me as a human, it's so heartening to hear that it's a struggle, you know, to get these things down, but it's worth it in the end, most of the time, hopefully. You know, I wanted to ask about Lucas a little bit, because you gave us a little bit of, you know, how you put some of yourself in your struggles into him. I have my own answer to this question, but I'd love to know, what's your favorite thing about Lucas Goodgame, would you say? Okay.
I think that my favorite thing about Lucas is that even when he feels there's no gas left in the tank, he still hits the accelerator pedal.
Yeah.
You know, he still, even at his most broken point, when that boy shows up, he finds something to give to that boy, even though he feels like he has nothing. And to me, I think that is that's a pretty good definition of being a hero.
Yeah.
You know, so.
And what my favorite thing was similar is that, you know, he is by all definitions pretty much a hero. I mean, when you read the book, you'll see, and yet he thinks he's a fraud. And even in that, you know, thinking, I'm not enough, I'm not enough, I'm not enough, as soon as that front door opens and he sees this boy in need in this lawn, even though he himself is in need, he meets it. And you know, the tagline you'll see in the opening cover, it says, life is full of guardian angels. And I love that because I'd never really thought about how we are guardian angels to each other over and over, right? I'm wondering if that idea, did you approach the book with that? Did it kind of come later after you finished it?
Well, one of the things I was consciously thinking of is the concept of a wounded healer.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, in many traditions, you know, the idea of a healer is someone who has a wound, and it's the irony, you know, in like Greek myths, you know, the person who's blind is the one that can see, you know, and so because Lucas has many wounds, he has childhood wounds, he has the wounds that happen at the beginning of the novel through trauma. He also understands pain, and he understands how important healing is, which makes him really reliable for the people that are hurting in his life. And you know, I know with my analyst, you know, he had gone through analysis, and you know, I tell the story that in my arrogance very early on, you know, 2 months in or so, I was like, when is this going to be over? I'm paying you so much money. How come I cannot write yet? You know, and he just kind of smiled and said, oh, that's really interesting that you think you can complete this process in 2 months. And then just paused, right? And I'm like, well, why? How long did it take you? And he said, 20 years. And I said, oh, you know, and it humbled me in this way that showed me I really wasn't having respect for the process. But I think of my analyst as this benevolent, genius, kind man that is to me like perfect in every way. But in revealing that, the depths of his brokenness, it took 20 years for him to get to the point where he can help other people. But because he went through that 20-year process, he knows what it's like to suffer. He knows the depths of other people's pain, and that's why he can help. And so I think that's one of the things that I was really thinking about with Lucas is, you know, his brokenness sometimes could be unattractive, but that's also the thing that makes him beautiful. And I think the reason, you know, quite selfishly, is that in my writer's block, in my early sobriety, I felt very unlovable. I felt very broken. I felt as though I would never be able to do what I'm doing right now and get up in front of a room ever again. I felt it was just kind of over for me. And through analysis and through the writing process, learning to embrace that suffering, learning to embrace those broken parts within us. I mean, that's what makes art. I mean, every writer I know, once I get to know them, and you know, not what they're saying on the internet, but once you get to know a novelist, all of their origin stories come out of trauma, almost 100% of the time, especially the writers that are writing the types of books that I write. And you get to know them and you see where their genius comes from. You see where the spark comes from. Like there's a cost for that. Mm-hmm. Somebody broke them, usually early on in life, and that's why they have this point of view, and that's why they can sparkle in the way that they do. It comes from wounds, and that's the genius of Lucas. He is being crucified through the whole novel, but that's why he can resurrect the town. Mm-hmm. That's the cost. That is the cost.
So, and you've mentioned, you know, Jungian analysis a couple times, and something that Lucas, I think, says his analysis to him is that, you know, analysis isn't therapy. Can you explain to anybody maybe who doesn't know what you see as maybe the nuances between the two, if there are any?
Well, I should start by saying I've never been in therapy.
Uh-huh.
So like I don't have an intimate knowledge of what therapy is, but I do have an intimate knowledge of what Jungian analysis is. Because I've been in it for 2+ years. Mm-hmm. I do many hours a week. So Jungian analysis, as I understand it, is based on, you know, the theories of Karl Jung. And one of the things that is interesting about it is not interested in taking away your symptoms. It looks at getting to the root of the problem and trying to fix the root of the problem. And so one of the things that was surprising to me when I entered into Jungian analysis is that I expected that I was going to feel better when I entered in. And my analyst says, no, you're going to feel much worse, and it's going to get really bad. And that pain is taking you where you need to go. You need to break apart. All of this kind of false persona that you've built, all of the things that you built as an alcoholic, all of that stuff has to be destroyed, and ego is going to hate all of it. And so it is a deep dive into your psyche, and it's a deep dive into who you were when you came into this world and who you are supposed to be. And so the theory is that we all are come into this world with a mission, an identity. And then we're raised by family members, and we go to schools, and they might have best intentions for us, but they might not know the secret of our heart. They might try to impose their own secrets on us. And so we pick up a lot of baggage. And one of the things that analysis does is try to remove all of that baggage so you can get to where you know who you are again. And sometimes that process is painful because it means, some of these relationships I've had with friends or family members, that's not really who I am. And just like when I stopped drinking, most of the people that I drank with, they just kind of faded away. Like that, once I gave up that identity, it was painful, to lose that identity. And so the goal of Jungian analysis is called individuation. And it's a little bit transgressive in this time period because the purpose of it is to figure out who you are as an individual, not as a group member. Who are you, and what are you supposed to do? Not as Matthew Crick as a husband or a teacher or as someone who gets who am I independent of all of that, and what is my mission on this earth? What am I supposed to do? And having the bravery and the courage and the clarity to accept that and do that, even if there aren't rewards, even if there are punishments, to become the thing that you were meant to be. So that's Jungian analysis as I know it. And so some of the, my friends in other walks of life that are in the mental health community, sometimes I'll hear them talk about, well, I'm going to cognitive behavior therapy, so I learned how to, not do this behavior. There's nothing wrong with that, that's a good skill to have, but that's not really what Jungian analysis is. Yeah.
Thank you for that. And because this is a book that's equal parts about this pain that you're talking about feeling broken, about grieving that process, it's also about, to use your word, resurrection, healing in some ways. What do you really hope the reader gets from the story that you're telling about the nature of grief and the nature of healing?
Someone asked me this in a podcast interview a couple weeks ago, and I stopped and I thought about it for a while. So, I'm going to have this answered very packaged and ready, but in the moment, it was kind of I had to really think and reflect. I think what I want people to think about is that every one of us is worthy of receiving love and giving love. Every one of us, all of us. And in the book, there's a lot of discussion about. Well, it's not a discussion, but symbolically, I set up these two characters. Lucas is the main character, obviously, and he responds to the tragedy with this sense of radical love. And there's another character in the book by the name of Sandra, and her response is very political. She wants to go into activism, and she wants to become the governor of Pennsylvania, and she wants to change gun laws, and so she's very interested in power. That's the conversation that she wants. And in this day and age, we talk a lot about power. And we should, there's been a lot of problems in the past, and we need to address past wrongs. But sometimes as we're having these discussions of power, one of the things that I worry about is that we're relegating discussions of love. And they become very divisive because power separates. And there's, there's a quote that I never remember the exact quote because my brain doesn't remember exact quotes, so I'll summarize it. But Jung said that where there's a will to power, there can be no love, and where there's a will to love, there can be no will to power, because one is the opposite of the other, they're the shadow of each other. And so when you want to have power over something, you want to control it, you want to suppress it, you don't want to love it. And when you love something, you want to set it free and let it exist as it is. So Lucas has this response of love, and Sandra has this response of power. one's not right and one's not wrong, they're just different responses. But the thing that's really interesting is that they're very attracted to each other throughout the novel. Lucas is always trying to recruit Sandra into his mission of love, and Sandra really wants to bring him into the activism. They're kind of afraid of each other, and they have this dance, they go back and forth, and it's because they're each other's shadow. Sandra really wants to have power, but she also carries this huge portrait of her husband because she loves him everywhere she goes, and she loves her kids, and she loves her town. And Lucas is saying, I just want love, I don't want any activism, I don't want to get into politics. But he's like he's super awesome at organizing the town to do this project, which is a form of activism. And so I think what we're really looking at, symbolically, is this split. Lucas splits all love and Sandra splits all power. And what the novel is trying to do is integrate those two things and make them whole again. So that we need both of those things, and we need to look at them equally. So, there's an expression in the South, y'all means all, they say, and this is a nice, beautiful expression, and a lot of times it's used by people to say we need to include marginalized people, people that haven't had a voice. Wonderful, like we definitely need to do that. But sometimes I think, does y'all mean all? Does that mean the guy down the street who has a political sign that you don't like? Y'all mean all? Does that mean the guy that voted for somebody that you don't like? Is that person in all? And I think the answer is yes. Like radical love, we have to love everyone. Everyone is worthy of love. Everybody's worthy of giving and receiving love. I think that's really important to remember as we have these conversations about power and politics. They're equally important.
Changing gears slightly, if you've read the book, I'm not going to give anything away here, but something that appears throughout the book is this idea of the monster movie. And it's one of the joyful aspects of the book. And I'm like, do you love monster movies? Did you have a history with it? Do you have a favorite?
I would say that I enjoy monster movies. One of the things I was thinking about is just the idea of a monster, right? And of course, when we have a tragedy happens, there's a lot of emotions, and there's a lot of rush to say who's the bad guy and who's the good guy, and I understand that. But one of the things that I do in my Jungian work is to reclaim everything that's out there and you deal with it in here. And so when you have in the situation with what happens in the book, when this young man, Jacob, goes in and shoots up a movie theater, the town, and especially Sandra, like this person is evil, like let's ostracize this person, let's project all our hate and shame onto this person. I'm not excusing what that person does. Jacob, he did something horrific. But one of the things that Lucas is constantly talking about was like, this was a member of our community. Like this kid was in our school. Like, how did we fail this boy? Like, who forgot to love? Like, how did this boy become this monster? And I think, as we have these conversations about power and control, which are really necessary, we need to find out ways to stop this evil from happening in the world. We also have to have this conversation of who is this person in our community that did this? And are they a monster? Do we other them and just say like, oh, they're not like us. They're this anomaly that happened. Or do we say, like, that's us. Like, we have that capability within all of us. How did we produce that? And how do we take on the responsibility of saying, let's not do that again? And so I think that's one of the things I was thinking about with the monster movie. It's very playful because the monster movie they make is about a monster, but the monster is the hero. And so in Jungian terms, it's reintegrating the monster. It's realizing that we all have the potential for good and evil, like within each one of us. And realizing that and being conscious of that helps us not to do the evil part. My analyst is always telling me that when you relegate things to shadow and you don't think about them, it's like trying to hold a beach ball underwater. If you say, like, I'm not violent, I'm not angry, I'm never going to allow anger in my life, when that anger comes up, it's going to be volatile and uncontrollable. And you see this, when people don't get in touch with their shadow side, it comes out in very ugly ways. But when we consciously say, oh, we are capable of these things, and we know ourselves, then we have a much more sophisticated relationship with those things that live inside of us. I know you were trying to go for fun on this
No,
one, so I'm going to get to the fun part.
That's what is so moving about it, is that you continue to take these things that you absolutely refuse to write off anyone in the book, and that is one of the reasons why I said I felt so much more alive after I finished it than when I began, was exactly that.
Yeah, and I think that's radical love.
Yeah.
You know, that's this idea of, I remember, you know, when I was a young man, a teenager, I fell in love with Kurt Vonnegut's work, which almost all young men do. And I remember him saying, there's no villains in my book. Like, there's never a villain, you know, because we're not gonna, I didn't know the terminology, but at the time I thought, wow, that is interesting. I love the Vonnegut books, and there's never really a bad guy. There's never somebody that we're projecting all of our shame and hate onto. And I think that really got into me. And the Jungian work that I've been doing is all about reclaiming, you know, the stuff that you project out into the world. You know, whenever you say, oh, it's them over there, it's them, it's them, it's them, I don't like that person. It's because you're projecting all the things that you don't like about yourself onto that person. And so that is a very humbling process, and one that I've been going through in the last couple of years. But I see that it's necessary, you know, and I got very sick on social media, you know, and when I got sober, I couldn't stand to look at it anymore. And I should say that there have been wonderful experiences on social media. So many people have written me beautiful things on social media, and I've contacted wonderful people. But in the aggregate, I just see people projecting shame and hate everywhere. On both sides, it doesn't matter who it is, you know, the loudest amplified voices are always like, it's those people over there that are evil, get them. And I just don't think that's a healthy way to live, you know, and I don't know that I've ever gone on to those types of platforms and taken in a bunch of that hate and felt better afterwards. Yeah. And so as I go around talking about these things with people, I see that there's a great hunger to end this kind of division. You know, I think that we want to integrate as a society. I think we want to be whole again. I think we want to stop doing what we've been doing for the last so many years. So I think there's a great hunger for that. So the monster movie was really a metaphor for that. And as I watched a bunch of the old monster movies like Cat People, The Leper Man, or even like a movie like E.T., which I really didn't think of as a monster movie until I went back and thought about it. They're all about, like, the monster comes in, you know, so E.T.'s a wonderful example of this. He comes in, you know, the little boy understands E.T., everyone else is freaked out, the government wants to dissect him, but E.T., you know, you think he's a scary thing, but he actually is this wonderful thing that wants to create unity and beauty and resurrection. You know, I mean, E.T. is a Christ story. Like E.T., if you go through it, that's really what it is. It's a Christ myth, retold by Steven Spielberg. And I think that was very interesting to me, because in early sobriety, I felt like a monster, and I was trying to resurrect myself. I was trying to fall back in love with myself and see myself in all my monstrosity in early sobriety. And say, how do I love this monster? How do I do something good with this monster? How do I not be ashamed of where I am at this time in my life? How do I present myself as like this feathered fish kind of thing, this thing that doesn't fit in anymore, and do something good with that? Yeah. So.
And I want to mention this before I forget. Jamie had mentioned this at the beginning, but if you're loving this like I am, Matthew has a monthly personal newsletter that's coming out tomorrow.
Yes,
I believe
21st.
on the 21st of every month, and each month has a different topic, you know, love, persona, sobriety, all these wonderful things. I've never signed up for a newsletter before, and I'm telling you, this one is amazing. So if you're looking to get content on the 21st of every month, you can find it on his website. But I want to ask, you'd mentioned writer's block a few times, and if there's anybody who's creative in the room or a writer, I mean, we fear that so much about what happens if this thing that I love, this thing that I need goes away, right? And I'm wondering now that you've kind of reached the other side of it, when you look back at that period of your life, is there something that season gave you, or is there something that you were headed toward that you couldn't see at the time? Yeah,
I've thought about this a lot. you know, I'll start. My analyst says that my psyche shut me down because I wouldn't get the help I needed any other way.
Mhm.
So he really believes that my ego was so strong, and my ego had been so rewarded by the world that it would not yield. And Richard Rohr has a lovely book. You love Richard Rohr? Okay. Have you
The
read?
only other newsletter that I get is Richard.
Wow, me and Richard Rohr. That's big.
That's it.
That's huge. Yeah, I'll say too that, you know, newsletter is kind of a loaded word. So
It is. It's not. Sorry. It's not.
yeah, it's like, so what I do is like an intimate, personal letter
Yes,
to my
it's a
friends.
conversation for sure.
Right, but back to Richard Rohr, he has this book called Falling Upward, which if you haven't read it, and if you're in middle life like myself, I really suggest it. But he talks about, and Jung said this too, particularly for men in general, but Richard Rohr is more general, that the first half of life is about ego, you know, developing ego and being able to find a way to move through the world well. And the second half of life is a relationship with soul. And if you're lucky, in the middle of your life, you have an ego shattering that destroys you. And he says that you'd be lucky to have that because if everything is going really well for you, like if your career, you're killing it, you've got tons of money, you have tons of respect, ego will never let go to do the soul work. It just won't. Like it's so reinforced that it's very hard to let go unless you have a shattering. And for me, I think that I needed that shattering. I needed that humility. You know, I worked really, really, really hard and made incredible sacrifices in my late 20s and early 30s to make Silver Linings happen. But then once that did happen, ego is just so reinforced, and you think like I can make things happen just with my ego. And what I learned through that process of getting sober and writer's block is that I don't have control over most things, and that it's an illusion that I had control over things. My analyst, and this is very Jungian too, talks about getting in touch with higher forces. And a lot of people don't know this, that Jung was very silently involved with starting AA. They came to him and asked, you know, what should we do to help alcoholics? And one of the things he said was you need to put them in touch with a higher power. So everyone knows that line from AA, you gotta get in touch with a higher power. And so the thought was that alcoholism is, and especially that drive to drink, is such an archetypal force that like ego is powerless against it. So you need an archetypal force to fight an archetypal force. That's hence the higher power. And so in early sobriety for me, you know, my ego was just like, you can do this, but really it was a submission process. And you know, I told you about how when writer's block was over, it was like someone flipped a switch, and it was just like right. It really felt like I was channeling the novel. And when I finished, and my analyst read it, I said, "What do you think about this?" And he just laughed, and he's like, "You still think you wrote this novel?" What he meant was like, you didn't write this. Like, you know, you were in service of something greater than you, and that's what came through. And I think that's really the shift. You know, with this book and the next book that I wrote. You know, when I wrote Silver Linings, I was just this kid, and like I was just trying to make a living. Like I didn't really have any nefarious objective, but I didn't have a sophisticated enough relationship with myself or my spirituality or my psychology to really understand what was going on. And so I think now that break and that shattering really gave me the opportunity to get in touch with things that I didn't even know existed before. And that was very, very necessary.
Well, I have a ton more questions, but I know that all of you have some questions as well. So I think we're going to open it up. So if you've got, you know, anything on your mind that you want to ask Matthew about, Jamie's got a microphone
Yes.
here.
And I'm going to ask you to make sure you speak into the microphone. So does anybody have a question? Okay.
All right,
Right
there's
away.
no awkward
Right away.
pause. Thank you so
No
much.
awkward pause this time.
So the people that you're talking about,
Talk into
that,
the microphone. Oh, right up.
like this?
Yeah.
Okay. I feel like there's a huge part of society, like mental illness, drug addiction, any kind of addictions, or, you know, that we just kind of run away from these people because they scare us and we think like they're gonna harm us in some way. Is there any advice from all your analytical thinking about this, how to think of it in a different way? I mean, obviously, if you don't think about anyone as being a bad person, just someone who has potential to be good, you're gonna be so much more forgiving if they do bad things to you. You know, like they always say to a child, don't say you're a good boy or a bad girl, just say, I like you, but I just don't like that thing you did. This thing is not so good, but you're good, you know?
Yeah, I think first of all, I think we are afraid of the things we don't understand. You know, so knowledge is always great. Like learning is really great. And sometimes in my analysis, when I'm having trouble with someone, you know, my analyst and I will psychoanalyze that person. And they'll give me books to read. You know, like here's what's going on. And then once you read what's going on, you're much less afraid of it. And I think the other thing that's really important is this idea of othering. You know, we're afraid of people that we think are other. And I think we need to remember that all of these problems that people have in the world, like we could potentially have them too. You know, and I think that I used to say very famously that I didn't trust writers who didn't drink. Like I said that for years, and I meant it. Like I did not trust writers that didn't drink. I think that's because I was afraid of my own potential to be sober. You know, and then once I became sober, you know, of course I trust. That was a process of learning how to trust. But I tell that story. You know, I also think that I was really afraid of the family members in my family that would fall into depression because I was afraid of my own depression. And so once I realized I had the potential for that and came to terms with that, like depression scared me much less. So I think it's always about education. It's always about realizing that we all have the potential for anything that any human could do in the world. Like that lives within us. It doesn't mean that we'll do those things. But to realize that people are having human experiences, and those human experiences don't make them less like us, they make them more like us, because we have all those potentials within us as well. And I think if we can really look at that and stop othering other people, whatever the behavior is, we'll become much less afraid of it. You know, my analyst always says this great thing, and I use it a lot. Just because you understand someone doesn't mean that you have to like be best friends with them. And there's a difference between saying, like, I hate that person, I never want to see them, and then saying, you know what, I'm just going to turn the volume down on this person a little bit. You know, I don't hate them, you know, but, you know, maybe I won't talk to them 5 times a week, I'll talk to them 2 times a week. You know, I don't have to destroy them, I don't have to say no. I'll give them as much as I can, just turn that volume down, and then maybe we could turn it a little bit back up. So I think framing it that way, rather than just running to like, this person is not me, and therefore I have to divorce them from my life. It's a practice that I work on, and I think it's an ideal. And I don't always live up to that practice. There are days when I'm human and I get frustrated and I fail. But that's what I'm always trying to move towards, you know, turning volume up and down, not dismissing people as non-human, you know, realizing there's light and love in every single person.
I had a question, it's kind of for both of you, because you both have novels that are set in that western Pennsylvania, borderlining Appalachia area. What is it that is it drawing you to write about that? Because Matthew, you were set much more in Philadelphia for your other books, but you went to western Pennsylvania, and then Amy, you write about that region as well. Is there something about that particular region that's attractive? I've read a couple other novels set in western Pennsylvania and that kind of West Virginia area lately. Is there something about that area?
I mean, I'll say 2 things. One is that, I mean, Matthew mentioned this earlier, is that, I mean, that's home to me and I miss it. I miss it. And even as I say I miss it, there are things that happened to me when I was young that have made it impossible for me to live there. So there's something about that tension between loving what I lost that I think that I could write books about that for the rest of my life and love it and sort of feel like, not that I got closure, but that I'm holding it in a different way, if that makes sense. I'm holding that loss, I'm holding that love in a different way. That's really powerful for me. And I would say the other thing is that, I don't know what it is about Appalachia or where I'm from, but something happened when I left was I realized the rest of the world had this opinion of what it meant to be from there, to live from there. Even the fact that I have a name like Amy Jo, people were like, whoa, 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 you know, like what does this name mean? And I realized there was this perception that the rest of the world, a narrative the rest of the world had created about this place that I was from that did not match what I felt was true. And so there's something about that paradox of you know, being an outsider and insider and having someone else define what you are that I think I wanted to grow up out of from the inside and say, I want to define this for myself, if that makes sense. So those are some things that I feel like for me make that writing process very valuable, that end up being kind of universal, because I feel like we can all kind of relate to having a label that's pushed on us in some way that doesn't feel like it fits. Yeah.
Yeah, you're integrating
Yeah.
your community into the rest of the country, which I think is great. You know, whenever I hear the term flyovers, you know, I just cringe.
Yeah.
It's so divisive and it's just so ugly. And so I think that's beautiful, you know. And for me, I just think, I don't think the places I write about are any better than anywhere else in the world. It's just a place that I know. And I feel strongly that you can only really write what you know. And there are other different, like my wife is more of a plotter than a pantser. Like, she does all the research and, you know, she's very good at that. But for me, I feel, you know, I've been tasked to write about this area, and every novel I say, I'm not going to set my book there again. And I sit there and try, and I'm like, oh, yeah, I can't do it. I've got to go home, and I've got to write about this place that keeps calling to me. So it's just the thing I've been tasked to do. Yeah.
Well, and your wife does cozy mystery, so that's a whole different genre.
Yes.
And I love them. Okay.
Thank you.
So now that we're talking about place,
Yeah.
so I live in Colorado, quite vaguely close to the Aurora Theater. So in Colorado, it's supposed to be Nirvana, I think.
Yeah.
And so Columbine started there. Or I have not gone into big theaters since then. I'll go to the Garden Theater easily, that's fine. And let's see, but this morning we just had another, you know, the Colorado Springs, which is focused on the family, kind of conservative part. And then they had the supermarket thing in Boulder, you know, where 10 people were killed. And so it's hard to think about it. And I'm just thinking, I wish you would set a novel in that area.
Yeah, well,
You know, for me, I think to do that, I'd have to live there for a while to really understand it. But I was in Colorado. I was in Denver earlier. It was late September. That's where I spoke, where Justin Cronin was there as well. And you know, there's a lot of, I had a lot of thoughtful conversations with booksellers about this, and you know, it kind of put a positive spin. You know, and of course, like all of those things are very real and horrific. The booksellers are also fighting in their own way, you know, and one of the things that was so wonderful was that was the first talk I had done in front of an audience since I got sober, and I was very nervous, and it was in the morning, and they were just so warm and wonderful to me afterwards. Like, it was just these people that lived in that area that are booksellers, and just amazing people. And then I remember going down to the floor where they have all the publishers have all the books set out for the next couple of years, you know, and everybody gets to peruse, and there are all these wonderful people buzzing, you know, and I kept thinking, like, they're picking out the soul medicine for their communities. You know, they're going in and they're fighting this battle on the ground. And I wrote this book called Forgive Me, Leonard Peacock, which takes place in South Jersey and Philadelphia area, but it's about it's a little bit of a spoiler, but the book has been out for a long time. It's about a high school student takes his grandfather's his grandfather's World War II Nazi pistol into school. It was his grandfather's war trophy. And he's saying he's going to kill himself and his best friend. And I wrote that book because every time there's a school shooting, we're always hearing on the news like all these horrific things, and like there's all these problems in society, you know, there's all these awful things, and like that's true. Like, we have to address all of that. But there's never a news story on all the days when a gun doesn't go off in a school. And like, I was in school for a long time, and there's a lot of heroes in those schools that are taking care of those kids and making sure. And so Forgive Me, Leonard Peacock is a book about why doesn't the gun go off? You know, I break the rule, you know, because whenever, you know, the checkoff rule, whenever you have a gun in a story, it's supposed to go off. And I said, this is the day that the gun does not go off. Why? This isn't going to be on the news, but who is the hero that saves this boy? You know, and of course it's the teacher, you know, and there are teachers in schools every single day, saints in high schools, you know, doing this good work, but we don't focus on them.
Yeah.
We don't go in and say, like, what are the things that these teachers are doing right? Let's do more of that. Let's increase their pay. Let's do that, you know? Instead, we just focus on the negative and, you know, what's going to, you know, be on the news and, you know, it's going to profit other people. Not saying that we shouldn't address the negative, you know, the laws, the power stuff. It's really important. But when I worked in a high school, the thing that I saw young people needed was love. And the best teachers in the building showed those kids love on a daily basis and got them safely through the day. And that's a beautiful thing that we don't highlight enough. And, you know, same with the booksellers in Colorado. Those people are amazing people, and they're not making a lot of money doing that. They're going in and trying to find a soul medicine for their community and hand delivering it to them on a daily basis. And when I saw that, you know, when I was with these people, they're doing this thankless job just like teachers, but they're there. Those people are in every single community, and that's a miracle. And I think that we really should be highlighting that more. And I think if we would train the cameras to look at the right things and promote the right things, I think that a lot of these things would start to sort themselves out, or that's my hope. You know, in the novel, the We Are the Light, there's two young boys, one Jacob, brother, and one is Eli's brother. One of them shoots people, and the other one shoots movies. And the question of the novel is why? And I would say that because one of those boys was loved and the other one wasn't. And I think that is really gets lost when we get angry about these things. And rightly so, we get so angry, but we forget to love. We forget that the thing that's missing in these communities is love.
Wow, that's a great note to end on, I think. Can't believe our hour has gone by so quickly, and you're talking about booksellers, and we're lucky here in Princeton, of course, to have a great bookseller at Labyrinth Books, and Dorothea, who owns Labyrinth Books with her partner Cliff, good friends of mine, and nobody does it better than Dorothea. And normally she would have been here selling books, but we had a little miscommunication. So I'm doing the book sales this morning. They're actually, like everybody else, struggling with staffing issues and keeping enough staff on hand. I know Dorothea's been working 7 days a week just to keep the store going while she tries to keep enough staff. And so we're lucky to have Labyrinth Books in town, and you're right, that's the heart of it. I think one other thing I was going to mention, like when you talked about, you know, not trusting a writer who doesn't drink, and I think a lot of that is, as a librarian, I go to a lot of the same conferences where there's authors, and, you know, to the big, you know, book expo, and even at the librarian conference where we have all the authors. And so much of the culture, I think the book culture, and in promoting books ahead of time, the advanced readers club, getting people excited, is there's always all these wine and cheese events and all these receptions, and they all involve alcohol. Yeah. And I think that's kind of embedded into book culture, and I don't know how that happened. Like, and that's why I kind of like having a book brunch. I'm all about the coffee. No.
There's so many secretly sober people too, and as I've been doing events talking about, they just come up like, thank you for saying that, because I don't feel like I can. And I just think there's a lot of people out there that, you know, it's difficult for them to navigate that world because of it.
Yeah, there's a lot, like when you go to these conferences, it's always wine and cheese and meet the author. And so, you know, I think that does start embedding into it.
I feel like I'm much more interesting sober too, because, you know, like, I feel like I can say more interesting things now than, you know, we go to these conferences and everybody's, you know, drunk, and it's probably boring. The conversation just goes on and on. So.
Yeah. So we do have Matthew's book for sale for $25, and he's going to be signing them. And Amy Jo, thank you so much, and we're going to look forward to your moderation. And Matthew, thank you for your honesty and being so forthright. I feel this is really, I mean, and when you read this book, you're going to get a lot more of this kind of hope. And I was just saying to Matthew, I read the book. As a librarian, I get the advanced copies, and I got one of the I can do it electronically now through my Kindle. And I downloaded it right away because I had been receiving the personal letters from Matthew in my email. I was like so looking forward to it. So I think I read this back in like June. I don't know, it was like months ago now. And I was like, oh, now it's finally out. So I had to go back and reread it. And the second reading was even better than the first. even though I knew the ending, it somehow actually, as I reread it, knowing the ending was somehow better. So I really encourage you to buy a copy of the book. I see some people already brought them with you. Matthew will be glad to sign those as well. That means you already know the ending, obviously, if you've got it with you, or maybe you just received it in the mail. Anyhow, thank you so much. And we have other events coming up if you look online at princetonlibrary.org. And speaking of newsletters, we do have a monthly e-newsletter that is just for books and authors. So if you're always at Books and Author, if you go to our newsletter sign-up page, you can select that you just want notifications about books and authors. So thank you so much, everybody. And let's give another round of applause for our